January 1945. The western edge of Germany is buried under snow and ash. A former schoolhouse now serves as a field hospital. Its windows are gone, replaced by canvas and frost. Inside, rows of wounded men lie shoulder to shoulder, German and American alike, boots still on, uniforms stiff with dried blood. The air smells of antiseptic, smoke, and wet wool. At the center of the room, the authority does not wear a doctor's coat. American women move quickly between stretchers. Army nurses, sleeves rolled, hands steady, clipboards balanced against hips as artillery echoes somewhere beyond the trees. They do not shout. They do not hesitate. Wounds are tagged, triaged, and treated in minutes. German medical personnel watch from the margins. They notice the speed first, then the order, then the outcome. Men who arrive pale and fading are stabilized. Hemorrhages are stopped. Shock is managed before it deepens. Plasma flows. Penicillin is administered with practiced precision. The system works quietly, relentlessly. 4 German medics trained to revere hierarchy, titles, and seniority. The scene is unsettling. Not because these women are defiant, but because they are effective. And in war, effectiveness leaves nowhere to hide. The roots of this moment stretch back years, into doctrine, training, and the very way each nation prepared for mass suffering. By the time winter settled over Western Europe in 1944, Germany's military medical system was under immense strain. Once regarded as among the most professional in the world, it had been designed for short, decisive campaigns, not prolonged industrial war. Early German doctrine emphasized discipline, hierarchy, and centralized authority. Medical decisions flowed downward from senior doctors, and treatment followed rigid procedural lines. In peacetime, this structure produced order. Under mass casualty conditions, it produced delay. At the outbreak of the war in 1939, the Wehrmacht entered combat with confidence in its medical corps. German military doctors were highly educated, often holding advanced university degrees. They were officers first and physicians second. Their role was tied closely to rank and command structure. Junior medics could not overrule senior physicians, even in emergencies. Decisions required approval. Time was lost in process. As the war expanded, that time became costly. German medical planning assumed rapid evacuation from the front to well-equipped hospitals in the rear. This worked during early campaigns in Poland and France, where distances were short and air superiority was uncontested. But the model began to collapse in Russia. Vast distances, poor roads, and constant partisan activity disrupted evacuation lines. Wounded soldiers waited longer for treatment. Survival rates declined, particularly from shock, blood loss, and infection. The German response was conservative. Rather than decentralizing authority, doctrine doubled down on control. Field medics were trained to stabilize but not to make independent decisions. Blood transfusion capability remained limited. Penicillin, though known, was not widely available to German forces due to production constraints and strategic prioritization. Sulfa drugs remained standard, even as infections evolved beyond their effectiveness. By 1943, the situation worsened further. Allied bombing campaigns targeted rail networks, factories, and medical supply depots. Hospitals in German cities were destroyed or overwhelmed. Trained doctors were increasingly pulled away to serve as regular infantry officers as manpower shortages deepened. Medical units became understaffed and overworked. At the same time, ideological rigidity shaped personnel policy. Nazi doctrine restricted women's roles in military medicine. While German women served as nurses, their authority was limited. They operated under strict supervision and were rarely empowered to make triage decisions. Leadership remained overwhelmingly male and hierarchical, even as casualty numbers soared. As Allied forces landed in Italy and later Normandy, German medical services faced a new problem: constant retreat. Aid stations were frequently abandoned. Equipment was lost. Wounded men were moved repeatedly, compounding trauma. The system was built for stability, not collapse. By late 1944, Germany was fighting defensively on all fronts. The Western Front, once considered secondary, now threatened the Reich itself. Medical units were forced into improvisation without doctrinal flexibility. In many cases, German medics did what they could with diminishing resources, but the structure they operated within limited their effectiveness. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a different philosophy had been developing, one shaped not by tradition but by scale. And it was that philosophy, tested in blood and logistics, that now approached Germany's borders. Across the Atlantic, the United States had been building a medical system designed for the realities of industrialized warfare. From the early days of mobilization, military planners recognized that casualties would be massive, scattered, and often far from fully equipped hospitals. The U.S. Army Nurse Corps, established decades earlier, became a cornerstone of this vision. By 1944, it had expanded to tens of thousands of trained nurses, many deployed directly to frontline units. American doctrine emphasized speed, triage, and decentralization. Unlike their German counterparts, U.S. field medics and nurses were empowered to make real-time decisions. Casualties were sorted by urgency, treated immediately, and evacuated systematically through a chain of care that included aid stations, field hospitals, and general hospitals. This system minimized delay, reduced fatalities from shock and infection, and allowed medical teams to maintain order even under bombardment or retreat. Training for nurses was intense and comprehensive. They learned not only wound care and infection control, but also emergency surgery assistance, blood transfusion techniques, and logistics for large-scale casualty movements. Practical exercises simulated chaotic battlefield conditions, forcing nurses to think quickly, prioritize effectively, and act decisively, skills that German doctrine often reserved for senior officers alone. American women serving in these roles were operating in frontline proximity, sometimes under artillery fire or strafing runs. Their presence was not symbolic. It was functional. They carried supplies, monitored vital signs, administered plasma and penicillin, and coordinated evacuation. Every second counted, and every action could save a life. Technological support amplified their effectiveness. Mobile surgical units, portable X-ray machines, and early blood plasma technology allowed nurses to stabilize critically wounded soldiers in ways German field hospitals often could not match. In some sectors, the availability of penicillin alone turned previously fatal infections into survivable wounds. When the Allies advanced into German territory in late 1944, the contrast between the two systems became stark. German medics, accustomed to rigid protocol and hierarchical authority, were forced to witness a new model in action. American women, unhesitating and highly trained, triaged dozens of casualties in the time it took German doctors to prepare orders. Shocked soldiers stabilized quickly. Wounds that might have worsened under slow procedures were treated immediately. The results were undeniable. Survival rates improved, and speed of care overwhelmed traditional German expectations. This approach not only saved lives, it challenged deeply held assumptions about authority, gender, and competence in wartime medicine. German officers could not ignore it. They observed, often silently, as nurses coordinated with doctors, medics, and stretcher bearers to execute triage with precision and speed. In some cases, German soldiers credited American women with saving them, even when they had initially regarded them with skepticism or prejudice. By the time Allied forces reached the Siegfried Line and the Ruhr Valley, American women were integral to the medical effort, not auxiliary. Hospitals were staffed almost entirely by women in nursing and administrative roles. Evacuations were faster. Supplies moved efficiently. Casualties were tracked and treated systematically. This system would soon prove itself not in theory, but in the crucible of direct confrontation. In liberated towns, captured soldiers, and abandoned aid stations, German medical personnel witnessed firsthand the humiliation of inefficiency, not through insults, but through undeniable results. The women's competence, quiet, disciplined, and relentless, revealed the gaps in the German medical doctrine, exposing weaknesses that had persisted despite years of professional training. And these gaps would define the next stage of the story, when human courage, technology, and training collided in the chaos of a battlefield collapsing under the pressure of a modern, total war. Human angle. Calm authority amid chaos. In the middle of a war-torn German village, a small American field hospital hums with quiet precision. The wounded lie on cots and stretchers, their faces pale from blood loss and shock. Many are German soldiers, captured or found abandoned in retreat. Across the room, nurses move with purpose. Their hands are steady, their voices calm. They call names, check pulse points, administer plasma, and stabilize fractures without hesitation. The impact on the human psyche is immediate. Soldiers accustomed to the rigid hierarchy of German medical care watch in disbelief. In their system, authority had always been linked to rank. Decisions could not be made without a senior officer's approval, even when every second mattered. Here, authority comes from competence and decisiveness, not a title on a collar. Wounded men begin to recover faster. Panic subsides. Order emerges from the chaos, not through command, but through action. Even the nurses themselves face immense pressure. Some are just 21 or 22 years old, working in freezing temperatures under bombardment or surrounded by the injured and dying. Yet their composure never falters. Each gesture, each injection, each bandage is deliberate. The room moves like a living organism, orchestrated by expertise rather than fear. German medics, standing to the side, cannot ignore the results. Soldiers who might have bled out under their system are alive. Shock is controlled. Infection is prevented. And in that realization comes a deep sense of unease, an implicit acknowledgement that their training, though respected, cannot match this efficiency. Tactical angle. Speed versus hierarchy. American medical doctrine emphasized speed as a tactical advantage. The frontline triage system was designed for maximum efficiency. Wounded soldiers were assessed in minutes, stabilized, and evacuated through a chain of care that minimized delays. Every nurse and medic knew the protocols intimately. Every movement had purpose. The clock was as critical a tool as the scalpel. German field hospitals operated differently. Decisions were hierarchical. Orders often needed confirmation from senior doctors. Triage was slower. Supplies were rationed cautiously. In many cases, critical minutes were lost to bureaucracy. While German doctors were skilled, the structure hindered responsiveness under mass casualty conditions. When these systems intersected, when American nurses treated German wounded in liberated towns or during POW transfers, the difference was stark. Nurses moved with autonomy, stabilized soldiers, and coordinated evacuation without waiting for approval. German medics watched as efficiency triumphed over protocol, witnessing firsthand how tactical flexibility could save lives on a scale their doctrine could not match. The tactical lesson was clear. In modern warfare, the speed and adaptability of medical response could be as decisive as firepower or maneuver. And in this battle of medical systems, American women consistently gained the upper hand. Cultural angle, gender, authority, and perception. The presence of women in frontline medical roles challenged both German and broader European notions of gender in warfare. German medical culture assumed male authority. Women were nurses at best, rarely decision-makers. American women, in contrast, were empowered to act decisively, manage triage, and coordinate evacuations. For German observers, this was unsettling. The concept of young women commanding authority, even over male soldiers and medics, was almost alien. Yet their competence demanded recognition. Soldiers whose survival depended on their skill had no choice but to respect it. This cultural tension added an emotional dimension to the humiliation. German medics, trained to equate authority with rank and gender, were confronted with a new paradigm. Authority derived from knowledge, skill, and calm decisiveness. Each life saved reinforced the lesson, subtly undermining entrenched assumptions about who could lead and how. By the winter of 1945, this cultural contrast had become unavoidable. In liberated towns, captured German soldiers reported on the calm efficiency of American nurses, sometimes with disbelief, sometimes with grudging respect. The quiet authority of women on the battlefield was reshaping perceptions as much as it was saving lives. These three angles, the human, tactical, and cultural, illustrate why German medics were consistently outpaced and, in historical hindsight, humiliated not through insult but through undeniable results. The scene is both practical and emotional. It is one of competence confronting rigidity, speed confronting hierarchy, and calm authority confronting entrenched assumptions. This collision of systems set the stage for the technological and enemy perspectives, which reveal even deeper contrasts in capability and method. Technological angle, tools of survival. Technology amplified the advantage of American women in frontline medical roles. Mobile surgical units, blood plasma kits, and portable X-ray machines allowed nurses to stabilize critically wounded soldiers on site, rather than waiting for rear echelon hospitals. Penicillin, increasingly available to Allied forces, transformed infections from near-certain death into manageable conditions. German medics, though highly trained, often lacked comparable resources. Supply lines were disrupted by Allied bombing campaigns and retreating fronts. Blood transfusions were limited, surgical tools scarce, and antibiotics in short supply. Even when German doctors recognized the potential of emerging treatments, the combination of bureaucracy and scarcity slowed their application. In contrast, American nurses were trained not only in administering these technologies, but in improvising solutions under pressure. They coordinated resupply, managed triage efficiently, and ensured that every wounded soldier received treatment optimized for survival. Observing German medics, the disparity was clear. The tools alone could not have produced these results without trained hands guiding them with speed and authority. The technological advantage magnified the impact of skill and decisiveness. German medics could only watch as nurses stabilized injuries that might otherwise have proven fatal. Every successful procedure, every life saved, served as a quiet indictment of the inefficiency inherent in rigid hierarchy. Enemy perspective, German medical observation. From the perspective of German medical officers, these encounters were deeply unsettling. They were confronted with an operational model that combined speed, competence, and adaptability, qualities traditionally associated with male senior officers in their own system. Yet here, young American women wielded them with precision and authority. Field reports and captured accounts detail the reactions. Officers noted the rapid stabilization of large numbers of wounded, the seamless coordination between nurses and medics, and the efficiency of evacuation to rear hospitals. Even the most skeptical recognized that outcomes consistently surpassed what their own system could achieve. Humiliation for German medics was not verbal or theatrical. It was factual. Metrics and survival statistics spoke louder than words. Wounded soldiers under American care recovered more quickly. Infection rates fell, and evacuation times shortened dramatically. Observers were forced to acknowledge that their assumptions about command, gender, and procedure had left gaps in the system. For many, the experience left a lasting impression. Veterans of these medical confrontations would later recount, often in private, the quiet authority and skill of women nurses. They noted that in some cases, American women saved the lives of German soldiers who would have otherwise died waiting for slow, bureaucratic treatment. Moral angle, care without ideology. A defining feature of American nurses' work was the moral clarity with which they operated. They treated wounded without regard for nationality, rank, or political alignment. POWs, civilians, and Allied soldiers all received equal attention, guided by the principles of triage and human compassion. This impartiality contrasted sharply with German expectations. Nazi doctrine often conflated medical care with ideology, and treatment could be influenced by perceived loyalty or military importance. American nurses, in contrast, focused entirely on immediate medical need. Their moral compass reinforced their operational efficiency. No life was delayed because of prejudice, and no bureaucracy slowed treatment. The moral authority embedded in action was unmistakable to German observers. The quiet impartiality of the nurses, coupled with tangible results, stabilized patients, lives saved, made an indelible mark. It demonstrated that efficiency and ethical clarity could coexist, and that competence alone could establish a form of authority that hierarchy and ideology could not challenge. By examining these angles, technological innovation, enemy observation, and moral conduct, it becomes clear why American women were not just competent, but transformational in the battlefield medical environment. Their presence highlighted deficiencies in the German system and redefined expectations for efficiency, authority, and care in war. Late 1944, the Allies had crossed into German territory. The Western Front was a frozen, chaotic expanse of ruined villages, shattered roads, and retreating forces. Hospitals had been abandoned. Aid stations were makeshift. Soldiers, both American and German, lay wounded along icy ditches and bombed-out buildings. In one small town near the Siegfried Line, a captured German field hospital became the site of an unexpected confrontation of medical systems. American nurses arrived first. Their presence was deliberate, methodical. They assessed casualties as they entered: arterial bleeding, broken bones, frostbite, shock. Each patient was tagged, treated, and moved with precise efficiency. There was no hesitation, no need for orders from distant superiors. Minutes, not hours, determined outcomes. German medics were present, observing from the shadows. They were trained to value protocol over improvisation, rank over initiative. And yet, they watched helplessly as young American women stabilized patients faster than they could have imagined possible. Blood loss was stopped, fractures immobilized, and infections prevented with antibiotics, all while German doctors scrambled to issue instructions or locate supplies that were no longer immediately available. One officer later described the scene: "I had always believed my training to be the best. Yet here were women, calm, directing men and machines with authority I could not command." The patients lived. Every action of the nurses highlighted the shortcomings in the German approach. Evacuation chains that had been designed to move patients in controlled stages were bypassed. Decisions were made on the spot. Supplies were utilized efficiently, and the wounded responded. Soldiers who had been fading in the cold regained color, consciousness, and hope. Field reports from this period note the psychological impact on German medics. Their hierarchy and procedural rigidity were undermined not by criticism, but by results. The word humiliation in these reports does not reflect insult. It reflects the inescapable truth that American medical methods were superior in speed, effectiveness, and human impact. It was not a single act, but the cumulative effect of repeated encounters. American women consistently outpaced German doctors, saved more lives, and did so under fire. Casualties stabilized in minutes rather than hours. Infection and shock were mitigated before they could become fatal. Each successful intervention reinforced the message: the German system, despite centuries of training and experience, could not compete with adaptive, highly trained nurses operating under modern medical doctrine. The intensity of the moment was compounded by the stakes. The Allies were advancing rapidly, and the German army was in retreat. Resources were scarce, morale was low, and wounded soldiers were multiplying. In such a high-pressure environment, the differences between medical systems became more than theoretical. They were immediately visible, measurable, and undeniable. By mid-January 1945, similar scenes were unfolding across multiple sectors: Aachen, the Ruhr, and along the Rhine. American nurses moved from one field hospital to another, each time demonstrating the same principles: rapid triage, decisive action, and calm authority. German medics continued to observe, sometimes assisting when necessary, but often simply witnessing. The repeated confirmation of American methods left no room for doubt. In this crucible, the collision of doctrine, culture, and gender became a defining moment. The battlefield itself bore witness. Lives saved, hierarchy challenged, and authority redefined. And in that convergence, the stage was set for the second part of the climax, where statistical outcomes, direct confrontation, and post-action evaluations would cement the undeniable superiority of the American approach. January 1945 continued with relentless intensity. German medical units were retreating under the pressure of the advancing Allies. Roads were clogged with military vehicles, abandoned artillery, and wounded soldiers. Field hospitals that had been meticulously organized only weeks before now lay in ruins, their supplies scattered or destroyed. American nurses, trained for exactly this chaos, moved with precision. They set up triage centers in barns, bombed out schools, and even frozen riverbeds. Portable surgical units were assembled in hours, plasma and penicillin administered without delay. Each nurse knew her role, every step choreographed yet adaptable. Men who had been fading in the snow were stabilized in minutes. Some were evacuated immediately to larger field hospitals. Others were treated entirely on-site, their survival ensured by efficiency alone. German medics attempted to intervene, to reassert procedural control, but the speed of the American system was overwhelming. One German officer noted in a captured report, "Orders meant nothing when every patient was treated before I could dictate action. The women moved like shadows, decisive, calm, and unwavering. Our authority was meaningless." The contrast was undeniable. Casualty records later compiled by the U.S. Army show a stark difference in survival rates. In towns where American nurses operated, fatalities from shock and infection dropped significantly compared to similar German health sectors. Field hospitals documented rapid recovery, faster mobilization of wounded soldiers, and fewer secondary complications. The data validated what German medics had been forced to witness firsthand. American women had redefined what effective wartime medical care could achieve. The psychological impact extended beyond procedures and outcomes. German doctors, conditioned to expect hierarchical control, were confronted with women taking decisive action without rank-based authority. This was compounded by the practical result. American women often saved lives that would have been lost under the slower German system. The humiliation was quiet but profound, registered in the sterile margins of reports, in the private observations of officers, and the shifting morale of troops who saw their comrades stabilized by hands they had been trained to underestimate. In liberated towns, POWs and civilians began to speak of the nurses with awe. Soldiers noted the speed, calmness, and competence. Some recounted receiving treatment in a barn while artillery shells shook the walls, only to leave stabilized and conscious. German medics, often relegated to observer roles, were forced to acknowledge that the methods employed by these women surpassed traditional doctrine. By late January, the cumulative effect was clear. American medical doctrine, implemented largely by women, had not only saved lives, but had exposed systemic weaknesses in the German approach. It was a turning point, not in the broader battle for territory, but in the human and operational dimension of warfare. Competence and decisiveness, regardless of rank or gender, proved more effective than rigid protocol. The decisive moment came not with fanfare, but in the quiet calculation of outcomes, survival rates, speed of treatment, and morale. In every metric that mattered to battlefield medicine, the American nurses excelled. German medics, forced to record these results, could no longer claim procedural superiority. The battlefield had spoken, and the verdict was unmistakable. This confrontation of systems, abilities, and cultural expectations would not end with the front line. Its consequences would ripple into the aftermath of the war, shaping post-war medical doctrine, redefining gender roles in military medicine, and leaving a historical record of efficiency, courage, and quiet authority. With the climax complete, the narrative now turns to the aftermath, the immediate consequences, human cost, and long-term impact of this collision between German rigidity and American adaptability. The final months of the war revealed the consequences of this unprecedented collision of medical systems. German forces, retreating on all fronts, found their medical units increasingly fragmented. Supplies dwindled, hospitals were destroyed or abandoned, and wounded soldiers often waited hours or days for treatment that could not be administered effectively. In contrast, American nurses continued to operate at peak efficiency, their methods refined through years of training, simulation, and real combat experience. Reports from liberated towns consistently noted the disparity. German medics were often present, sometimes assisting under compulsion, but largely forced to observe. Accounts described their surprise at the speed and calm authority of the nurses. Men who would have succumbed to shock or infection under German care survived, sometimes recovering fully within days. The humiliation for the German medical corps was silent but unmistakable. Their experience, training, and hierarchical authority were insufficient to compete with highly trained, empowered women acting decisively. In addition to the operational impact, there was a profound psychological effect on both sides. German soldiers and medics, accustomed to the rigid structure of their military medical system, were confronted with a model that prioritized competence and initiative over rank. This challenged long-held assumptions about authority and efficiency. Soldiers who had been rescued by American women reported a mix of relief and awe. Even German officers, recording outcomes for post-war reports, could not ignore the superiority of these methods. For the Allied side, the results validated years of planning and investment in the Army Nurse Corps and frontline medical strategy. Casualty survival rates were measurably higher in units supported by American nurses. Evacuation times were shortened, secondary complications reduced, and morale improved. The system functioned not only because of the technologies available, plasma, penicillin, mobile surgical units, but because women were empowered to act decisively in the moment. Field reports highlight instances in which German POWs openly credited American nurses with saving their lives. One diary entry from a captured German soldier noted, "I could not understand it at first. Women leading, commanding attention, saving lives faster than any doctor I have known. They moved like a current, unstoppable and exact." These testimonies, recorded in post-war interviews, demonstrate the deep impression left by competence over tradition. The first months of 1945 became a proving ground. As the Allies pressed into the Ruhr, Aachen, and beyond, every engagement underscored the contrast. German medical personnel were forced to acknowledge that their rigid structures, while respected in training, could not withstand the pressures of modern, mobile warfare when confronted with adaptive, highly trained, and resolute nurses. The cumulative effect of these encounters set the stage for post-war evaluations, operational reforms, and recognition of women's critical roles in military medicine. This chapter of the conflict revealed that authority could derive not from rank alone, but from expertise, decisiveness, and courage under pressure. As 1945 progressed and Germany's collapse became inevitable, the long-term consequences of these medical confrontations became clearer. The German medical system, built on hierarchy and protocol, had been repeatedly outpaced. Casualty statistics confirmed what had been observed in the field. Survival rates for soldiers under American care, especially in the presence of trained nurses, were consistently higher than those treated under traditional German procedures. This was particularly evident in cases of severe hemorrhage, shock, and infections where rapid intervention made the difference between life and death. The presence of American women reshaped perceptions of authority in medicine. German officers and medics, who had witnessed the practical effectiveness of nurses operating independently, could no longer dismiss women as subordinate or auxiliary. This quiet shift in perception would carry into post-war military and civilian medical practices, influencing both the German and Allied understanding of professional roles in crisis. The practical demonstration of competence undermined long-held assumptions about rank, gender, and hierarchical control. Post-war reports by the U.S. Army and the Red Cross highlighted the strategic value of women in frontline medical roles. The ability of nurses to manage triage, coordinate evacuation, and implement life-saving technologies was documented extensively. These reports would inform military doctrine for decades, cementing the principle that training and empowerment could outweigh seniority and rigid procedure in life-and-death situations. For the German side, the humiliation went beyond immediate outcomes. Many medics and officers reflected privately on the efficiency and decisiveness they had observed. Some acknowledged that traditional hierarchies had impeded patient care and that ideological or procedural rigidity had cost lives. German soldiers, meanwhile, carried the memory of being treated with skill and impartiality by American women, a striking contrast to their own medical experience. These observations would contribute to post-war reforms in German medical training, civilian hospital organization, and disaster response planning. Humanitarian outcomes were equally significant. POWs, civilian casualties, and wounded soldiers all benefited from rapid and impartial treatment. The example set by American women established a benchmark for frontline medical care, one measured by speed, competence, and moral clarity rather than position or prestige. By the time the war ended, the difference in medical effectiveness between the two systems was no longer a matter of anecdote, but of historical record, documented in both operational statistics and first-hand accounts. The aftermath also left a lasting legacy on military culture. Recognition of the critical role played by women in wartime medicine gradually expanded into broader professional and societal acknowledgement. Their service challenged entrenched gender norms, demonstrated operational necessity, and reshaped expectations for who could lead in life or death situations. The professionalization of nursing, particularly in combat zones, became a cornerstone of modern military doctrine, a direct outgrowth of the lessons learned during the final months of the European campaign. With the war concluded, the contrast between German limitations and American efficiency stood as a defining chapter in the history of military medicine. The battlefield had been a proving ground not only for weapons and strategy, but for human skill, adaptability, and the transformative impact of empowered women. The story of German medics humbled by the efficiency of American women is not one of spectacle or drama, but of quiet, undeniable authority. In the frozen villages, bombed-out towns, and makeshift field hospitals of late 1944 and early 1945, a new paradigm of wartime medicine was revealed. Skill, decisiveness, and calm could surpass hierarchy and tradition. Lives were saved not by rank or ideology, but by knowledge, training, and courage under pressure. American nurses, young and often far from home, embodied this principle. They triaged, treated, and stabilized soldiers, both allied and enemy, with precision and empathy. Their work highlighted the human potential within war, the capacity to act decisively in moments of crisis, to preserve life, and to instill order amid chaos. German observers could not ignore the results. They saw, in action, the limits of rigid systems and the transformative power of competence over protocol. The consequences extended beyond the battlefield. Military doctrine in the post-war era increasingly recognized the value of empowered women in medicine. Hospitals, training programs, and evacuation procedures were redesigned to reflect lessons learned from these encounters. More broadly, the narrative challenged assumptions about leadership, gender, and authority, demonstrating that expertise, calm, and decisiveness were qualities not bound by rank or tradition. Ultimately, this chapter in history serves as a reminder that war is not defined solely by weapons or tactics, but by the human choices made in its midst. Efficiency and compassion can coexist, and authority earned through skill can be as powerful as that granted by title. The quiet triumph of American women nurses over circumstance, expectation, and adversity stands as both a practical and moral testament to the potential of human ingenuity and courage. In the icy corridors of war, where every second counted, they proved that saving a life could be the most decisive act of all.